All right, hello. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to see you. Welcome to the first Graduate Student Caucus event of the fall semester. This is the Teaching Showcase, again, presented by the Graduate Student Caucus of the Comic Studies Society. And I'm Morgan Podraza. My pronouns are she, her, and I'll be hosting and moderating the amazing minds of this event tonight. So I'm going to start by introducing folks. And I would invite everyone to have conversation in the chat. If you have questions during a speaker's presentation, please feel free to put them there. Otherwise, I ask that you hold your questions until the end of everyone's presentations, where we can have a nice Q&A and chat about all the wonderful teaching skills and lessons and knowledge that our wonderful presenters have for us today. So we're going to start today with Dr. Ayani Cooper. Dr. Ayani Cooper is a program associate in the Academic Program Services and Professional Development Department with the Modern Language Association. She is a graduate of the English doctoral program at the University of Florida, where she specialized in comics and visual rhetoric. Her research interests include monster theory, gender and sexuality studies, speculative fiction, erotica, and the study and creation of multimodal texts. Ayani co-hosts and produces the podcast Sex, Love, Literature, which discusses how and why representations of sex, love, and desire in pop culture matter. Her work can also be found in other public and scholarly forums, including in Monstrous Women in Comics, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and the Oxford Handbook for Black Horror Film. And you can find more information about Ayani, including her publications at ayani.com. We also have Bermello Isusi, who is a very recent PhD at The Ohio State University. They're currently a lecturer in the same institution, and their dissertation addresses identity formation in comic autobiographies from Spain by queer artists and by parents with children with disabilities. Their current project departs from that dissertation is about mental health in Spanish comics. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Hector Garza has been a flourishing independent artist and a dedicated educator in San Antonio for the last 20 years. His art celebrates his hybrid identity as a Mexican American, while also reimagining the intersection of Mexican traditions and contemporary American pop culture. After receiving a bachelor's in art with a minor in music from Our Lady of the Lake University in 2004, Garza went on to earn a master's in education for the University of Notre Dame in 2008. He completed his MFA in painting from the Savannah College of Art and Design in 2018. Garza is recently graduated from the Institute for Doctoral Studies in Visual Art. He currently works as an art instructor at Incarnate Word High School in San Antonio, Texas. And this new body of work explores the idea of queerness in the borderland, memory and hybridity in the mixing of traditional Mexican motifs found in contemporary pop culture, while also exploring the shape-shifting Latinx queer body. A wonderful lineup of folks today. Thank you all so much. Give everyone a clap for our wonderful presenters. And I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Ayani Cooper. Let me get
Excellent.
my sharing up.
Okay. So while you do that, I just want to say thank you all so much for being here. I am super excited to be talking with you all today about my experience working with the Sequential Artists Workshop out of Gainesville. So I'm going to go ahead and start my timer. And could we do the next slide? So super quick about me. Morgan read my bio, which I now feel like I put a little more in it than it needed to be, but I thought it would be helpful to give a little bit of context about my teaching experiences before I dove right into kind of the conversation about SAW. So my time in the PhD program at UF was actually the first time I had ever been in front of a classroom. And I didn't teach in my master's program. I didn't really TA in undergrad. So it was a brand new experience for me, which was eye-opening in a variety of different ways. A lot of my colleagues and my friends came into their doctoral work knowing that they wanted to be professors. They knew they wanted to teach. They knew they wanted to do research. This was kind of their mindset. And that wasn't the case for me. I knew research was something that was important to me and something that I wanted to continue doing, but I wasn't quite sure how teaching fit into the overall schema of my life going forward. And based on my experiences in graduate school, I made the decision that ultimately I wanted to kind of go the quote unquote alt-ac route. I used to say I wanted to go back into industry, whatever that means. I don't think I knew at the time. However, there were parts and elements of teaching that I absolutely loved and wanted to kind of find a way to integrate that into my life going forward. Um, so with that, I will go into the next slide, I believe. So that's how the sequential artist workshop comes into play. A friend of mine took a class at SAW, and I'll explain what SAW is in a second. And taking that class was like, hey, Ayani, I think you'd really like to be part of this organization. I'm going to put your name out there and get you in touch with some folks, which is how I came to be involved. But what SAW is the Sequential Artists Workshop. It is a 501c3 grassroots nonprofit comic school and creative community, it says on their website, that's located in Gainesville, Florida. I actually, the first time I ever went to SAW was with one of my graduate classes. We were doing an archive tour of different archives around Gainesville, and the Sequential Artist Workshop had a pretty substantial comics archive that we got to explore around and experience, which was a lot of fun and very exciting. The workshop was founded by cartoonist Tom Hart back in 2011. So he's been running it for quite some time, and it's grown a lot since its initial founding. I guess that was last decade. And one of the things that's really interesting about SAW is for a long time, it was very Gainesville focused. But with the pandemic that rolled through starting in 2020, it really changed up how SAW was thinking about doing things and how it wanted to reach cartoonists. So a lot of their programming actually became hybrid and online. Everything at that time, of course, was online, but it's something that they decided because of the kinds of people it was bringing in from across the country, they wanted to keep doing that kind of work, which is how I kind of became involved in 2021. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the classes that they do, but I'm an online instructor. So I'm able to live wherever I need to be. We were in Texas, actually in San Antonio for a year, and now back in New Jersey. And I'm still able to kind of maintain this relationship with SAW, which one is great because I love them, but also in a way keeps me connected to the Gainesville community now that I'm moved away from grad school. So really quick about the SAW student body, which is part of the reason I actually wanted to talk about working with SAW with you all, is that moving from working very specifically with undergrads, right, teaching folks who are between 18 and 21 mostly, to moving to a classroom that was kind of full of everybody was a super interesting experience. So while there are folks who are, of course, college age in the classroom, there are people who are older than my parents that decide to take this class. And it makes me think both how I am managing the classroom, but also how I'm honoring the knowledge that is coming into the classroom space. Because some of these folks, they're first-time cartoonists, they've never picked up a pencil in their life, and they're like, I'm just excited to learn. And some of these folks are published cartoonists who are coming into the classroom for a variety of reasons. So it's a kind of interesting balance I have to maintain, especially since I'm coming in not as a cartooning practitioner, but as somebody who's coming in from the scholarly perspective. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about SAW classes. They run the gamut, actually, of a variety of types and of topics. So one of the things that they do is this year-long intensive program, which is broken down into semesters, so a little bit like a college year. And then each semester has 4 comics-focused courses that people are going to be taking. So that's kind of one of the big things that they do. And I believe it's all online now. You can join from anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, really, which is difficult for timing for some folks. But they do record classes so that if you're in Tanzania, you can watch at a time that it's more feasible for you. And they also use this online platform called the Mighty Network in order to kind of create a discussion board kind of place in order to have and facilitate facilitate kind of a classroom feel so people can talk outside of the Zoom and share articles and things like that. There are also kind of like 4 or 6 week courses. I believe Comics for Teens, which is here, that's coming up, is one of those. It runs from October 5th to November 16th, so you can kind of see the spacing on that one. There are also one-off courses that happen sometimes where it's just a particular class that people can sign up for. And they also do like free Friday workshops. So there's a lot of different things at a lot of different price points that people who are interested in cartooning, people who are established cartoonists who want to, keep doing the work, that they can join and engage with. Next slide, please. So thinking specifically about the courses I teach, I have one class that is part of um, the year-long intensive, which is called Modern Comics Exploration. And this is actually the first course that I taught with SAW. For a little bit of background, I was approached by, after my friend put in a good word for me, I was approached by kind of the co-manager of the organization. She was looking for a way to kind of offload a course that she had been teaching so that she could focus more on the running of SAW, working on getting grants and all of that other nonprofit work that demands a lot of time. And she suggested I teach the Modern Comics Exploration course, which rather than focusing on active cartooning is really thinking about the variety of kinds of comics that are out there and introducing them to people. So I've been teaching that for, I guess it'll be 3 years now, since 2001. And we're gearing to teach that, or I am gearing up to teach that again in November. And then I have 2 courses that are actually new. These are the first time I'm doing them this year. They're 4-week Zoom reading groups. So I kind of function more as a facilitator in these classes. The first, I did a cartoonist spotlight on E.M. Carroll, which was great and was so self-indulgent, but I had an excellent time, and the students did as well. And I just finished a short class called Monsters Remixed, which was thinking about monsters outside of the context of horror. So I am going to talk a little bit about the differences between these classes and thinking a little bit about how I think about them pedagogically, but something that's useful to know, besides the fact that they are all online, they're all on Zoom, the Modern Comics Exploration class is larger because these are all people who are part of that full year-long program. And the Reader Spotlight classes are a little bit more intimate. They're a little bit smaller, a bit more like a book club with a well-educated moderator, let's say. Next slide, please. So though the classes are a little bit different, and I'm going to break down what those differences are, I kind of have uniting class goals for each of them, in part because I know I'm working with a very diverse audience of students who are bringing their own experiences to the classroom. So my first goal is to have students think deeply and critically about comics in applicable ways to their practice. So one of the things that I do, for instance, is at the end of every class, I ask them what they want to steal from the comics that we've read. And I established that early on. I don't mean it literally, right? Like, don't cut out panels, but what about what we have read can they then bring back into the work that they're doing? These are very discussion heavy classes. So we are doing a lot of talking throughout. We're doing close reading. We're looking at panels. We're looking at full pages. And I really do want their expertise as artists to guide the conversation. So while we do think about narrative, it is often in context or in connection with, like, okay, so why do you think they decided not to use borders on this page? Or what is the brushwork doing here? And why does that work for you? Knowing that I am, in a sense, less experienced than they are with thinking about the technical details of the art because I'm just not a practitioner. But I am very good at thinking deeply and thinking critically, and that's kind of what I bring to the table here. I also really want to introduce students to works and genres outside of their personal bubbles. So for a lot of students, they're reading some genres for the first time in my classes. So for example, in Modern Comics Exploration, I have a unit that focuses on manga specifically. And for a lot of people, they're like, oh, I've never wanted to approach manga. It always seemed kind of weird to me. I didn't get the big eyes. But at the end of the conversation, at the end of the class, they're like, oh, this is a whole new world of comics making that there's a lot for me to learn from. So kind of getting through those personal bubbles of personal taste and experience to broaden out what they can learn from a variety of different comics from across the world. And last but not least, I look to discuss and dissect how illustrations, text, paratext, and materiality impact meaning, emotional impact, and reading experience. So it's a mouthful, but really what I like to think about is how all of these things touch each other. So for example, going back to modern comics exploration again, we look at webcomics and we look at old school webcomics. So on their own individual pages with ads and comments and all that kind of stuff. And then there's the question of what does it mean to have your comic impacted by all of this stuff that's around it that actually isn't your comic, but it impacts the experience. Next slide, please. So just to really quickly run through the different ways I think through these two courses as I am getting close to the end of my time here. With the Modern Comics Exploration class, which is part of the year-long intensive, this is a 6-week course that runs for 1 hour. So it is kind of a somewhat tight period of time, closer to like a 50-minute class. So I know I have to kind of optimize the amount of time that we are together in the room. One way I do that is by posting questions to the Mighty Network so that they can already see where my brain is going and start to think about how my questions may intersect with or completely differ from what they were thinking about when they were moving through the text. What my pre-posted questions also allow is for students who aren't able to attend because of time zone issues or because of life or what have you, they can also participate and leave comments and make their own posts, in part spurred on by the questions that I'm asking. I also open class by having everyone or whoever's interested in sharing kind of give their initial thoughts based on reading. But I really rely upon my pre-established questions for moments when there are lulls, just because we have less time to be going through everything. So the Modern Comics Exploration class is kind of a more tightly structured environment as opposed to the read along classes. Those are for 4 weeks and they're 2 hours. So we kind of have a little bit of space to stretch out and explore. There are no pre-written questions with this. I kind of come in and ride the vibes, if that makes sense. And part of the way I do that is that I open the class with a 1-minute free write. So they can take some time to digest what they've read in the space of the classroom. And then the conversation itself is very open. I ask them to show screenshots of panels or pages that they're interested in. There are some panels and pages that I bring that I'm like, oh, I think this is cool. So this kind of class is more participant led than the Modern Comics Exploration, which is a little bit more facilitator led. But the final thing that I will say before I hop off the mic is that I don't assign any homework for these classes. The Modern Comics Exploration class, they already have a lot of work that they are doing as part of the intensive. So this more serves as a space for them to think about all of the other things they're doing and bring it to a deep discussion of a work, which is something they don't often get to do. So for the final slide, this is just my information. So if you have any questions, if you want to contact me, let me know. I'm always happy to talk about comics and talk about pop culture and things like that. But that's my time. Thank you so much. And I'm excited to hear from the rest of the speakers.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cooper. And I would love it if folks, as you're talking about all the cool stuff that you're doing, feel free to drop links to those things in the chat so our participants can go directly to them and start checking out all your cool stuff because you all are doing lots of cool things. So next, we get this sorted. Okay, next we have Dr. Bermello Isusi. And I will share my screen and give it over to you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me well? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for coming. And I'm in the Spanish and Portuguese program. I'm at Spanish and Portuguese department. So my considerations are always a little different also, but in a way they're also similar. So why don't we start and see what my considerations are? So next slide. Okay, so several things. I teach here at OSU, which is a big R1 university, and usually there are quite many people studying minor and major. So the classes I've been able to use are either intermediate or high level courses. And there's always something about language. Because in my experience, whether it's intermediate level or higher level, the language can be a hard issue for many. And they don't necessarily talk very much because they're shy or they don't feel confident. So there's something about language and an accessibility. I'm still working with more accessibility for, in this case, also blind or low vision readers. But I'm certainly follow, for example, what Nick Susanis is doing with comics for blind readers. And also consider beyond the language, also what we're doing, because Spanish can be a lot if depending on what we're reading. Like, is it history? Am I using it for something related to language or race and gender, as one of the examples I'm showing you today? And finally, is the comics vocab for the analysis of comics? Is it crucial, or sometimes, do we need, or is it necessary that we go over them in the class, or that they need, because sometimes it's just with the story, and I just give them enough for them to follow. So this is three main things that I pay attention to. And again, language is very important because the classes are in Spanish. And so this can help them have a better experience and a better approach. So next slide, please. Okay, so three examples are on the right is Chuen Tu Wu. It's an autobiography that Pachagridulce, a Chinese Spanish woman, who did this autobiography, and I'm talking about it in a minute. And Ana Peña's Todo Bajo el Sol. These two are not translated into English. I'm sorry. Ana Peña's Todo Bajo el Sol talks about touristification of Spain in Spain since the 60s, and I'm talking about that last. And then the Spanish Civil War by Paul Preston and Jose Pablo Garcia. This, as I was saying in the previous slide, this is related to history, to one of the topics that I'm also usually pay attention to. And as we're going to see with these three examples, these are just some of the interests that I do have personally, and, both as a teacher and as a scholar who writes, because I do talk about gender, talk about history, and well, I'm sorry, English is hard today, and I've taught many hours today. Okay, so if we continue, I can show you what more deeply what I do on my interests. So with the post-President's Spanish Civil War, this is an adaptation. The drawing is by Jose Pablo Garcia, and this is adaptation of Paul Preston's scholarly writings on Spanish Civil War. He's British, and he does talk a lot about Spanish Civil War and the dictatorship, which is from 39 to 75. And in these comics and reading comics in Spanish, also good because they seem lighter, and it's not like assigning a 30-page historical reading. Even if it's in English, that can be a lot because there's so much we don't know, or my students don't necessarily know about Spanish history. Maybe their first approach, or maybe even if it's not, it can be a lot. And reading in Spanish can be a struggle sometimes. So they seem lighter, and in a way, they end up being lighter because they enjoy it. And if it's less anxious for them, then they end up using it better, or in different ways, maybe not necessarily better, but in great ways. And I can sometimes, not with this specific case, or not with this specific case, I can think of them as supplementary bibliography, or I can also give them supplementary bibliography, which, you can, if they're interested, or for the further research or writings that they need to do, they can also go back to them. And again, with the Spanish Civil War, it's a heavy topic, and it's dense, and it can take many weeks. So a comic like this can help with the historical context. And for the first approach, whether you dive deep into this, or you just decide to go a little lighter as for first impression. Or comic from below, Gente de Aquí, Gente de Allí. It's from the same author, Chuan Wu, that I was mentioning earlier. And it's also, I was also doing this as a complementary reading to other main readings on nationalism or nation building. And that, in this case, I only taught it once, but it was great. It allowed me to see that people were going to it. And many ended up saying that they went to it first because it was a comic, and then it helped them go back to the main readings on nation building or nationalism. So this is also a great approach as for that anxiety, whether with the topic or with the language itself. And we continue, please. So in a course on Introduction to the Analysis of Literature and Culture, I have used this comic a few times. As a woman from Chinese parents, but she was born in Spain, we can address race and gender in Spain. And we can also introduce comics as a tool for research to write about. And I like it very much because they open very easily to this comic. And also because it's good. And it allows me to go into vocabulary on comics, like what is a panel, what are the balloons, color, format of the comic. And I always take a lot of comics on that first class to show them the variety of them. And so we can, this is a good example of when I just also focus on both, two classes, one more focused on comics, and then an introduction to the topic that we're going to be seriously talking about on the second day, and then that second day on the topics. And with an image like this, we can see a little bit of the perspective on, even if we don't understand the language, we are seeing the parent relationship, birth, and some sisters. So we can also sense a little of a gender here, and also about the point of view and all that. And so, yes, next. And Todo bajo el sol, can you click again, please? No. Okay, no. Todo bajo el sol. I used this in a class I visited once, and it was this was also a great class. I just saw the question. I can go back to it later. So this class, Todo bajo el sol, again, as I was mentioning earlier, this is a kind of historical comic and goes back to the 60s, and to trace a line on how tourism has been in Spain since the end of the dictatorship to current Spain, contemporary Spain. And I also made sure that they had the vocab, enough vocab for them to analyze comics, but since this was has been the highest level course I've taught, even if it was only a class. So even if I'm expecting them to know a little bit on comics or a little bit or more Spanish, I also made sure. And I also took some comics to class to show and make more explicit the fact that this book is horizontally and that it does talk about the issues, that the panoramic view that this gives about tourism in Spain since the 60s to 2021, which was the one it was published. And so as the example, more specific example that I ended up doing with that class, and we'll go to our last slide. There's one image. Click again. Okay, so this same image from before. So after going back to the vocab and to the books, we also end up talking about the format and make it more explicit if that was not if that wasn't explicit enough earlier. And by asking them to describe this double page in Spanish to people who cannot read it either partially or entirely, this has several objectives. One, make sure that they understand that they can describe the panels and the specific vocab for comics in Spanish, and that they can also just use the language very much. And they may be paying attention to the color. They may be paying attention to the size of this specific panel. This was one of the images that I had selected in the class. And it was great because the same image was analyzed very differently by different groups. And the language always varies, of course, but this also points to how they've been understanding how the conversation about comics and how we do talk about comics. And being for lower vision readers, it also helps them realize how much we take for granted when we're reading. And also did this with Spanish film, and it also worked. Actually, I got that from got this activity from film, and it was wonderful because they feel confident to be speaking Spanish, a little more confident than sometimes reading a 300-page novel. And the topics are usually effectively or empathy. I mean, they get closer to these comments. I don't exactly know why, or if it's just a generational change. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it is language or what but they do get a lot done through the comics. And in that comic by Chuan Tzu Wu on that autobiography of the Chinese Spanish woman, for example, that also helps, and that is an intermediate level. But most students ended up writing in the several courses I've taught. They ended up writing about her and about her comic. So that also points to the possibilities of comics in language classroom. And now that I'm also thinking of going back to Spain and probably teaching English there, I'm also thinking of doing this, but of course a little different with English over there. And I may have been slightly short, but I think that's it. These are the references. And I know that Ana Peñas has a book in English, and that is wonderful. I will find it now and share it with you on the chat. And the question, do I leave it for later or?
Yeah,
Oh,
I
yeah,
think if
well,
folks have questions, let's put them in the chat and then we can all come together at the
perfect.
end, if
Thank
that works all right. Thank you so much, Dr. Bermello Isusi. All right, Dr. Garza, let me get your. All right, Dr. Garza, take it away.
Okay, thank you so much. And it's 6:09. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share of my story and to share of what I'm doing in my classroom. It still feels very surreal being newly minted PhD into the league of amazing scholars that I've had the privilege of meeting at the comics conference that I had went to with Sam and Anna and others. Amazing people, and also the connections we have to each other at the Latinx Pop Lab at UT in Austin, and so many wonderful people that have been there, especially a shout out to Caitlin. And she was like amazing to be my second pair of eyes during the dissertation writing process. So I've been teaching for 20 years, and in those 20 years, two of those were in graduate studies, and I was sent to Oklahoma City to teach. And it was elementary, so that was very interesting. Every day was very new. And the reason why I went to get my MFA at Savannah was because I really wanted to tap into the art that I was missing, right? Because when you're in a program like the one that I was in, it was very much about pedagogy, teaching strategies, different types of psychologies, how to adapt your way of thinking with exceptional students. The lesson might look great on a piece of paper, but then when you execute it, it's a whole different thing, and how the students respond to it. And so for me, as a practicing artist and educator, has been a rich space for me to empower my students, and I've enjoyed it. I really have. With all of its ups and downs, it's been great. So I want to focus a lot on just the graphic novels that I've introduced to my students. So this is graphic novels as shape-shifting identities and resistance. I tailored this for my senior level class. So I have incredible artists in my portfolio class. And at this level, these students are preparing to graduate. They're working on their essays for college and things like that. So they've experienced all these different events throughout their school life, and I'm really blessed to have them. And so you'll see in the examples that I have to share here. So in preparing for this, because I'm an art teacher, I teach painting, drawing, watercolor, and drawing, and it's all foundations. The senior level class, that's when it gets really intense, and they just explore different mediums. Um, so I incorporate graphic novels in my other drawing courses, but I always have to be very careful in how I curate the graphic novels that I present to my high school students, because at the end of the day, it is a Catholic private school, and I not only deal with students, but I deal with their parents. It's like a package deal. I think in college, there's much more freedom. But I think that it's important to introduce graphic novels, especially if they've never read them, but um, kind of test the waters. What draws them to the stories? I wish some of these graphic novels existed when I was growing up in a small border town, Del Rio, Texas. Um, Born in Mexico, but every weekend we would cross bridges to go visit our relatives. And so it was a constant performance, right? Performing all in Spanish when I was in the relatives and performing all in English when I was in school. And we weren't allowed to speak in English. My brothers had to take an ESL class when they were in elementary, and I never understood why they would take them to another teacher, but that's what was happening. I I got the language because I was 3 and I was in kindergarten, and it was just kind of like picture books were my everything. I was drawn to picture books. Um, and so I've always thought that it's very interesting that we begin in early childhood with picture books, and then somewhere along the lines, then we're given chapter books with only words and no images. And as an artist and drawing and doodling, I could imagine things in my mind when I was reading, but it would have been cool to see them both together all throughout. And I think that in high school we kind of get trapped in this like, no, they need to be very like critical, analytical about just the text and the words. So for me, it's very important to critique that way of approaching learning and reading, and have both methods and in harmony with each other, word and image, through graphic novels. So this is one example. You can see it, the magic fish. I mean, beautifully illustrated. Chun-Li Wen. It's just trying to find the words to come out. And they use the imagery of fairy tales, right? So it's not the way the fairy tale always the prince and the princess. So I thought that was very beautiful the way they use that imagery to do that. The other one that I wish I had was Welcome to St. Hell, another really good novel speaking about trans life and those negotiations, those conflicts. And I think it's important even for me as a queer person, Mexican growing up on the border, that while I had my own kind of struggles, it was good to learn and see other stories that might not necessarily be about me, but it creates that sense of empathy in the way that I approach just living, right, as a human being on this planet. Um, this one, Be Gay Do Comics, highly recommended. Lots of different styles, lots of aesthetics. I found this, I forget where, like maybe at a half price. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's a deal for me. Obviously, the memoir of gender queer. This one is Our Colors, Kengoro Tagame. And when I started reading this, obviously the graphics are not as intense as some of his other stuff, which is amazing. That really, the black and white creates a different kind of aesthetic in my mind as I'm trying to navigate the story and the text, and Heartstopper. Um, when I first picked it up, I read it, I was like, wow, the way that the styles um, illustrated the connections, and those connections that were about to happen, or that in between space. And I always talk to my girls, because it's an all-girls school, I talk to them about feminist scholars, and especially Chicana Latina scholars like Anzaldúa, and what is Nepantla, but that in between space of creativity, the borderlands, is a space where you can take apart, bring back together. It talks about healing, it talks about ruptures, it talks about everything so visceral of our lives, that how we navigate things. So these have really been great for me in my scholarship. So my dissertation was Latinx graphic novels and queer stories as forms of resistance. So that was a big element to that. And so how do I present that to my students without kind of like pushing my own thoughts, but allow them the freedom to say, I'm like, I want to pick this and I'm going to enter into a dialogue with this. So I knew that the English teacher in my floor had taught Persepolis in the English course that they were taking. So they were very familiar with it. So I chose that one. Mexikid, I mean, I love that one. That one is like anyone who's ever taken a road trip with their family and siblings and all the chaos that comes with it. And even if you didn't, it really shows a lot of the Mexican culture and the bilingual aspect too, and pop culture. M is for monster. That one, for me, if I was teaching Frankenstein, I'd probably teach it side by side with it, because it has the same focus, but in this case, it's two women, right? It's sisters, and what comes from that, like there's loss, but there's this whole reanimation and what happens at that moment. Moon Girl, I love. And when I like the vivid colors, and like I really wanted to give them a different taste of everything. Some of them more like superhero genre, but then some other ones that have really deep issues like Persepolis. And then Run. This one, because our school is also one of the parts of their mission is to teach the girls about social justice and being advocates, and having a voice within the community, volunteering, and not being blind to what history has portrayed, but also what is hidden and who has been telling these stories, and how do we critique that. So I provided the National Core Visual Arts because I feel like many of my colleagues uh, assign artistic projects. And for those of us who are in the studio practice, it's like we have different kind of ways to assess them. So I always like for them to understand like what are you assessing them, and what are you giving them? You know, you can't just say, oh, just draw a picture and that's the end of it. I mean, there's more intentionality that I like to challenge my colleagues with if they want to include something artistic. I don't want it to be a side thing. I want it to be a part of the meal, right? So then the big ideas for me are the artists create works informed by their perspectives. Perspectives are shaped by experience. When studying materials of art from a different culture or time, it is important to understand the context to avoid assumptions and misreadings. So, and for the Persepolis one, Iranian art is diverse and has changed over time. Our campus is very diverse, okay? And so I feel like it's good for the girls to be exposed to a variety of different cultures. It may be Catholic, but we try to keep them open to other faiths and other forms of belief. And in my class, we use the perspective of art, right? And so the last thing there is graphic novels combine storytelling with images and have unique artistic concerns. So what I did was when I started this lesson, I had them and I changed the seating. I think that's really important. Um, if you have, I have big tables, but sometimes when I'm presenting something like this, I like to have them all gathered around the table. And because they're seniors, I really want them to, because when they go to college, it's not always going to be in rows. Like it's spaces, it's different kind of seating. And I want them to not be so like, okay, this is where I sit forever. Like, but kind of change it up. And so I put the novels in front of them and I said, okay, take one, flip through it, and then like a couple of seconds, pass it to the next person. So everyone will get to see what they want. And so after I did that, some of them, it was very easy. I'll take Persepolis, I'll take Mexicid, I'll take, and then once they do that, I tell them, okay, whatever you've selected, now let's take some more time to like start reading the first couple of pages, kind of go through it and see how you feel. And they did, and that worked well. It gave them the choice. So then the exploration of ideas in my studio class is very important. With if it's a big collection of work or if it's just a small project like the zine that we were doing. So question is, reflect on your life and events that may have caused personal beliefs to change. And I feel like when you have one good like pulpy question, it just kind of like starts to blossom. And I think as educators, sometimes we always want to like have everything so like clear and scaffolded, but sometimes what I've learned through my experience is that everything starts with one question, one, and then let's see where they go with it. And sometimes if I had like 10 questions, but we're still on one, I stay in that space. I don't rush them. I'm like, okay, so this is really good. Why did you choose this? What personal connection? And then they just like go with it. So then research a female revolutionary activist from around the globe who has fought against political fascism and or restricted political social systems to affect personal freedom, even though this activism has led to imprisonment. And I still try to have another thread throughout the discussion too. And the way we tell stories, that we have the freedom to draw and create these zines without fear of anything happening to us. But it's opening another window again to enrich the lesson and have them really create something unique from there. Present the project to students and explain that they will be drawing a zine. So once they choose it, I guide them and I tell them like, this is the zine that we're gonna do. And then I'm trying to see the next page. So just to kind of go through that. So this was by Sofia Avalos. They had to create the zine, but through the aesthetic of the artist, but they had to put their own personal story. So because it was M for Monster and it was the dynamic between two sisters, she was inspired by the connection that she has with her sister as that support. And it gradates right from the darkness to the light to the last two pages. And then the next one, yeah, it's a little bit, yeah. So Emma Ponce Mata chose Moon Girl, and she connected it with her negotiations, her family's divorce and how that affected her and all the movement and all the not being considered and drawing a parallel to Moon Girl with such immense knowledge that she almost feels like an outcast, right? No one understands her because she's just so brilliant, and those trying to also be a kid as well. And then there, yeah, and I wanted to celebrate my students. So that's a picture of them, of my portfolio class. So from left, it's Emma, Ella, you have Michelle, you have Deanne, you have Isa, Gina, Sophia, and Evelyn. So that's those were the samples of the projects we did. But again, thank you. I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garza. What an incredible panel of educators we have, which with such different types of ways of approaching comics and using comics in the classroom. Thank you so much, all three of you, for sharing so thoughtfully the work that you're doing currently with students of all kinds. So I'm going to look in the chat real quick. Feel free to keep putting questions in the chat, or I think that you can raise your hand, but I'm going to start just at the top, which was a question for Mikel from Ayani. Do you find that students in your classes are comics readers, or do you feel like you're teaching visual literacy and language skills at the same time?
Thank you for the question. I don't think most of my students read comics, but a few do, or maybe have read a few. But so I don't think I could say they're comic readers, but I'm definitely yes to the teaching both visual literacy and language skills. Definitely that. I do tend to assume they haven't, just in case, just to make sure. And if the class is good in that aspect of having read many, I mean, things can go more quickly from there. But yeah, no, I do pay attention to both language and visual literacy. Of course, in the higher the level, the less I do pay attention to language, or I feel like I have to pay attention. But yeah, definitely still there. It's still there, of course.
Thank you. So we have a question from Gabrielle in the chat for Dr. Garza. It says, as a fellow Texas educator, I was wondering, do you experience any issues assigning works that deal heavily with issues of race and ethnicity, such as pushback from administration, parents, or students themselves? I was at A&M for my PhD, but just started working at Sam Houston State myself.
Yes. I haven't experienced it myself as an art teacher, but an English teacher who used to work at my school got pushed back when she was teaching The Handmaid's Tale. I think it was like a level or senior class. I think it was a junior class, and the parent was not really wanting her to teach The Handmaid's Tale. And so that was kind of like the pushback to her, but that for me, I think it's always in the back of my mind. That's why I said like this stack of graphic novels that I have next to me that I shared that I wish I had. Um, I I don't think I would be able to get away with it. I would say that the invitation is there because they're very curious. So I always say like if you want to know more about this or if you have different interests, these are here. And I like to bring my own graphic novels to the class. I'm like, these are for you to look through. But I think as of now, it's I'm very mindful of how like I said, I curate what I'm presenting them because you also have to read your audience. And I feel like I always start with the students. If they would have said, do you have anything else that talks about like identity and sexuality? Then I'm like, oh, well, I'll leave it here. And if it so happens to like grow legs and get in your bag, it's there. So I think they know they know what they want to read. And it's interesting to see the dynamic of teaching at an all-girls school because you see that those different connections that are trying to like blossom into something else. And it they they will go into the library, they will search, they will read. But I think for most of them, it's I don't think it's that big of a deal. But for admin, if anything, I would probably just consult with like maybe the counselors and say, listen, I would like to introduce some of these graphic novels. What are some strategies that you would like to, help me with in presenting them? I know that my teacher that teaches on film, he always does a draft to give parents like I'm gonna show clips of these films, but we're discussing the elements and principles of design. Like it's not just to show them things and to scandalize them, but it's like there's a purpose here, right? Because we do want to teach them to be empathetic human beings and to be able to like embrace those things that maybe they are dealing with at the time. Um, Within that kind of system, right? That is a very private Catholic school. And we've had many students that have left because the services weren't there to really service those needs. So as of now, I have not. But I try, even when I presented these zines that they created, very personal zines. I've seen themes of divorce. I've seen and the one that did the run one, it's almost like she wanted more guidance. And I said, well, think about it this way. What are some things that you were taught? And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, that's kind of messed up once you start to really dig. And she's like, oh, okay, I know what to do. And so she was like, I'm going to draw myself like a little girl in the classroom. And that's the beginning, how I was given all this knowledge or whatever in elementary, and then how like it shifted and I became wiser. Um, so it's some of them don't even have words, the zines. And I think like an example like this, she has a very keen awareness of her line making and panels and things like that. But again, no words. So I always like to leave it free. If your thing is gonna have no words, that's fine. But then you get my students that are very meticulous and very like straight, clean lines. So, but as of now, I don't get pushback, and so basically, I will continue to push it a little bit until whatever. But I'm gonna continue to like ease into it. So hopefully that answers.
Thank you, William. Go ahead.
Certainly anybody can answer this. But Dr. Garza, Dr. Bermello Isusi, you both showed us for classes that had developed curriculum and coursework. And Dr. Garza, you talked about sort of letting classes develop in an organic way, trying to, that it's our job to scaffold, but often the real learning takes place in kind of letting class kind of develop around itself. But I wanted to ask how that process looked when you guys are putting readings together. I'm teaching literature courses, and I find myself kind of working between wanting texts that I think do interesting things individually, and letting the connections develop organically through the semester with the students, and there or looking for texts that very clearly work together, um, and seeing what students can pull out of very overt connections. And I wonder how you guys sort of do the balance of picking and choosing what goes into your classes and what comes out as you teach.
I could jump in.
First, or okay,
Go ahead, Professor. Go ahead.
it's okay. It was just assuming that, but go ahead and I'll go later.
I always think about things as an artist and through like just themes. I use Art21 as a website for videos that talk about different artists, different voices, and they break it down for educators beautifully. It's like spaces, movement, home, and community. And so I try to pull one thing, and maybe it's a word, and then I try to find other threads kind of to connect to that. But I always think of where they are, the student. And in my case, they're seniors about to graduate high school. So all those different things are in their minds. So then I'll go through my like library and I'm like, what would be a good thing for them to kind of put in their mind as they're preparing to enter the world? So obviously at a college level, that might look a little different. Maybe you might be looking at maybe memories, right? Because when I was in college, it was all about, that connection to when I was growing up in Mexico, things like that, because my English professor was like, write about an experience in your life, about your culture. So there I go, right? In memory. So what graphic novel can accommodate that idea of the streams of memories, and whether that's memoirs and, things like that. So that's just one answer. So I'll let the others jump in.
When I'm thinking of this, individual classes also come from not of the best practice in the sense that I am a bit obsessive. I mean, too obsessive with the the reading load throughout the semester. And so if I have the ability to just select everything, because not every time as a student I wasn't allowed to choose everything, then I was thinking of that load. And for example, thinking of that course on the Spanish dictatorship, I told them the very first day, I told them the first couple of weeks are going to be tough. We need a bit more context. So we're going to be reading more, and I was assigning that comic on the Spanish Civil War, and together with a documentary, for example. So the first day, it was episode 1 of that docuseries and chapter 1. Then chapter 2 and episode 2. And then another reading in English. But that kind of helps them see that, okay, and it can be through a documentary, or it could be a reading. And then I was in class, I was reinforcing, and I was also giving them, okay, you've got this PDF, this text, this chapter on this specific topic, and that. And I or the comic on the Chinese Spanish woman. I try to measure what comes before that and what comes after that. So I was thinking if there was a novel before that comic, and so it seems lighter than jumping into a comic. Whether it is or it is not, but they approach it as like it's lighter. I was like, oh, this is nice. And so I, at points, again, that obsession is a bit not the healthiest, but it does help me. But I'm measuring it better now. After a few years, I'm measuring it better, but it's still obsessive.
And I guess I can jump in here. So thinking about kind of constructing your course and the kind of readings that you pull in, I know for me, I like to think kind of a little bit like Professor Garza. I think about thematic through lines and what my goals are for bringing these particular texts into a classroom, because it kills you, but you have to make decisions. You can't just pick all of the cool graphic novels that you want to talk to people about. But I found that my classes that have always felt the most cohesive are the ones that kind of come back to a central point. So for example, at UF, I taught a class that was about giant monsters and megamechs, thinking about monstrosity in media. And though I went over here and did manga, and I went over here and did old films, and I went over here and I talked about I don't know, Godzilla and the Iron Giant, it was all connected back to this idea of monstrosity as a through line. We even read oh, what did we read? Samples of we did Alice in Wonderland. So even though all of these texts seem very disparate, it all kind of came back to this core theme of monstrosity. And that really helped me like make decisions about what texts I was and was not going to include. And even though with the modern comics exploration course I teach, it's a little bit more contained because, you know, day one is going to be about newspaper strips, day two is going to be about this or that. I do have some flexibility in which topics I choose to discuss. And actually, being able to change things based on student feedback has been really excellent. So there are texts that they really liked, and there are others that were like, I see why you included this, but it would actually be better to get some context from this perspective. So having student feedback can also be really useful in thinking about how you're putting your syllabi together.
Thank you all so much. We have perhaps our final question from Katie in the chat. It says, I am so curious if there's something that you experimented with or wanted to try early on in your teaching career that you now approach differently with a bit more teaching experience. For example, are there any readings that maybe didn't go how you expected, or are there some strategies for encouraging students' verbal participation that you now adopt to navigate those moments when the classroom is silent? Dr. Cooper, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Thank you. I think for me, this might be the theme of the meeting or of the panel, but it was definitely to kind of let go and go with the flow. The first time I taught, I had a script that I followed, and that acted as the support to get me through being in front of the classroom for the first time, but I learned very quickly that having that tight of a rein on what I was trying to do would not benefit me in the long run. So it was really a over the course of my teaching, it's been a lesson of balance of where do I function better as an facilitator, as an instructor, when there's a little bit of even personal scaffolding, even if it's for me and not for my students. But where are the places where you just kind of let go and see what organically populates? So that's something I absolutely approach completely differently now. And I think it served me well in classroom contexts that are not kind of the structured college classroom environment that I had come to expect at first.
Okay. I think because I teach foundations in drawing and watercolor and painting, I think that you know, when the zine was only for the drawing students, and because the painting students were doing all these like the canvas work and watercolor things like that. So I feel like I think I would love to experiment with each foundations course and their own making of a zine, but maybe with watercolor paper, not just the mixed media paper, maybe stories and how they translate to the different mediums that we paint with, because there's every color palette, every word, every bubble, every line says something. It expresses an emotion. And I think that also as a working artist, when I curated a show a couple of years back, I included panels from graphic novels. And I think that I would like to probably curate an exhibition of just the panels. Have it be that word and image all the way throughout, because we had a mix of different things. Because the show was about being like Mexican American, Latino, Chicano, all these different types of things into one exhibit. So we had paintings and things, but I think if I would do something new moving in the future, would be that, and maybe have it as part of like part of our senior show at the end of the year with the girls, to really like get the large sheets of paper and just go for it, right? And really put that on the walls. So I think as an artist, I would love to do that.
And I think I would like to teach more comics. Where is that? In the Spanish and Portuguese department, it's rare that we do talk about comics. So if I could talk more about them, and probably having more in-hands kind of activities, and probably drawing a little bit and workshop with that. And all of the implications that addressing comics is. Maybe it's not only comics, but maybe half comics or mostly comics. And that would help me then have more ideas, because right now I do have some, but my experience is a bit limited too, with the amount of work that I've been able to do. Which, but yeah, for example, that kind of describe the description for low vision readers or blind readers, that comes from actually teaching in a Spanish film class. So I know that I would like to have that on comics itself more, so I could think of more activities like that for workshops on paint, on drawing, or some other different activities. But then, and this is not my fault, but I feel like at the same time, like, I wish I had more experience.
Well, thank you all so much. Really appreciate everyone giving their time and energy on this Thursday afternoon, evening, to come learn from these wonderful educators and to hopefully get some ideas for some of the teaching that you may be doing this fall or in the future. So I would just like to say thank you again, and rounds of applause to Dr. Ayani Cooper, Dr. Mikel Bermello Isusi, and Dr. Hector Garza. Thank you so much for your time and energy. I will encourage y'all to check out the Graduate Student Caucus website, where we will be hosting some materials from our wonderful educators today, so that you can kind of use them to have inspiration moving forward as you grow in your own practice as educators and creators. So again, thank you all so much. And I hope you all have a great evening.
You want to get a picture real quick, Morgan? Okay.